Imagine a world where your divorce lawyer is a pair of shoes and your daily shampoo comes straight from your own bladder. We are bypassing the noble stereotypes to dive into the bizarre, gross, and genius survival hacks of indigenous tribes. From fatal dinner parties to sacred clown worship, here are 33 facts that prove the past was absolutely unhinged. 1. If you think your diet is strict, try surviving in the arid Great Basin where tribes like the Shoshone turned personal grooming into a literal snack break by eating their own lice. Yes, you heard that right. While sitting around picking pests off each other's scalps, they wouldn't just flick them away. They popped them right into their mouths. It sounds absolutely revolting by modern standards, but in a harsh desert environment where calories were scarce, lice were basically tiny, walking protein shakes that never went bad. It was an endless food glitch. You get a clean head, a bonded community, and a weirdly sustainable snack all at once. Honestly, it gives a whole new terrifying meaning to the phrase nitpicking. But when you are starving, you don't turn down free nutrients just because they have legs. 2. Before you judge the Inuit for their hygiene habits, you should know they were actually chemically brilliant, even if their methods smelled absolutely terrible. They utilized human urine as their primary shampoo and soap, which sounds like a cruel prank, but there is actual science behind it. Urine contains ammonia, a powerful natural degreaser perfect for cutting through the heavy oils and soot that accumulate when you live in a smoke-filled igloo. But they didn't stop at hair care. They used this golden liquid to tan animal hides, breaking down fibers to make leather soft and supple. So that pristine, beautiful fur coat worn by a hunter was likely processed in a vat of pee. It is the ultimate zero-waste lifestyle, turning biological waste into a cleaning product, though I wouldn't recommend trying to bottle and sell this particular formula today. 3. If you think sushi is adventurous, the Yupik and Inuit peoples invented a dish that makes raw fish look like baby food, affectionately known as stinkheads. The recipe is a biological hazard. They would take king salmon heads, bury them in fermentation pits in the ground, and just leave them there for weeks until the flesh decomposed into a mushy, cheese-like sludge. While it was a prized delicacy rich in essential fats needed for the cold climate, it was also like playing gastronomic Russian roulette. If the temperature wasn't perfect or the pit wasn't sealed right, the fish would develop botulism, a deadly neurotoxin. People literally risked their lives for a bite of rotten fish head. It takes the concept of an acquired taste to a level where your dinner might actually kill you before dessert. 4. Modern divorce involves expensive lawyers, crying in court, and years of misery. But the Navajo tribe figured out a system that was brutally efficient. Since they were a matriarchal society where women owned the property and the home, a wife held all the cards in the relationship. If she decided she was fed up with her husband, she didn't need to file paperwork. She simply placed his saddle and moccasins outside the front door of the hogan. That was it. No arguments, no counseling, just a silent eviction notice. When the guy came home and saw his shoes in the dirt, he knew it was game over immediately. He would just pick up his stuff and walk back to his mother's house in shame. It brings a whole new level of anxiety to leaving your shoes on the porch, doesn't it? 5. While stand-up comedians make careers out of complaining about their in-laws, Apache men were legally required to avoid theirs completely. This wasn't because they hated them, but because of a strict custom called avoidance, meant to show extreme respect. An Apache man was culturally forbidden from looking at, speaking to, or even being in the same room as his mother-in-law. If she entered a dwelling, he had to scramble for the exit or hide under a blanket like a frightened child. It sounds ridiculous to us, but the idea was to prevent any possible friction or disrespect between families by ensuring they never interacted enough to annoy each other. It is honestly the most genius social distancing strategy ever invented for family peace, and I bet a lot of you are wishing this rule still existed today. 6. Imagine a job where your only responsibility is to be the most annoying, backwards person in the village, and people actually worship you for it. These were the Heyoka, the sacred clowns of the Lakota, who were bound by spiritual vision to do everything in reverse. If it was a blistering heat wave, they would shiver in thick buffalo robes complaining of the frost, and if it was freezing, they ran around naked, sweating. They rode horses backwards and said yes when they meant no. But this wasn't just performance art. It was a spiritual duty to keep the tribe humble. By acting like absolute lunatics and breaking every social norm, they reminded everyone that the established order is fragile and shouldn't be taken too seriously. They were basically holy trolls using satire to balance out the seriousness of warrior life. 7. Long before Las Vegas casinos, the Mississippian culture was ruining lives with a deceptively simple game called Chunkey. The premise sounds innocent enough. Roll a polished stone disc across a plaza and throw spears to mark where it stops. It was basically Stone Age bocce ball, but the gambling culture around it was absolutely unhinged. Men didn't just bet a few beads or a nice feather. They would get caught up in the adrenaline and wager their houses, their weapons, and eventually their own freedom. You could walk onto the field a free man and leave as a slave because you misjudged the roll of a rock. It got so bad that losers sometimes committed suicide rather than face the shame of total destitution. It proves that humans have always been degenerates when it comes to betting, no matter the century. 8. In almost every war in history, the goal is to eliminate the enemy. But for Plains tribes like the Sioux and Cheyenne, killing from a distance was considered lazy and unimpressive. The ultimate flex was something called counting coup. To achieve maximum glory, a warrior had to ride right up to an armed enemy, touch him with a stick or hand, and escape completely unharmed. It was a psychological power move that effectively said, "I could have ended you, but you aren't even worth the arrow." Returning to camp claiming you touched 3 guys was infinitely more prestigious than sniping them from a hill. It turned the battlefield into a high-stakes game of tag where the prize was legendary honor and the penalty for failure was, well, death. 9. While European soldiers were obsessed with helmets and protection, warriors from many eastern woodlands tribes did the exact opposite with a hairstyle known as the scalp lock. They would shave their entire heads but deliberately leave a long, prominent lock of hair right at the crown, often braided or decorated to be as visible as possible. This wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a massive, arrogant taunt to their enemies. The warrior was essentially saying, "I am so confident you cannot kill me that I have left a convenient handle for you to grab my scalp if you try." It was psychological warfare woven into their hair, daring anyone to come close enough to take the trophy. It turns a haircut into a death wish, signaling that they were absolutely fearless and ready to fight to the bitter end. 10. We all know beauty standards can be painful, but the Chinook and other tribes of the Pacific Northwest took this to a horrifying extreme with head flattening. They believed that a flat forehead was the ultimate sign of high status and intelligence, while a round head was for slaves and commoners. To achieve this look, they would strap a cedar board to a newborn baby's forehead for months, physically molding the soft skull until it slanted backward at a severe angle. It sounds like torture to us, but for them, it was the equivalent of getting your child into an Ivy League school. If you didn't have a head shaped like a wedge, you were literally looked down upon as a nobody. It proves that parents have been forcing their kids into uncomfortable molds for social status for thousands of years. 11. If you think shaving with a dull razor is annoying, imagine the grooming routine of Native American men who viewed all facial hair as ugly and animalistic. They didn't just trim their beards, they waged a total war on hair follicles using pairs of clamshells as makeshift tweezers. They would painstakingly pluck every single hair from their faces, and in some tribes, they didn't stop at the beard, but went for the eyebrows and eyelashes too. It was an agonizing process that left their faces perfectly smooth and alien-looking to the hairy Europeans who arrived later. Next time you complain about a waxing appointment, just remember these guys were ripping hair out of their faces with seashells purely for the aesthetic. 12. In the deep jungles of Central and South America, and even further north, indigenous healers had a solution for deep wounds that makes modern stitches look boring. They used giant soldier ants as living surgical staples. The healer would hold the ant by its back and let it bite the 2 sides of a gash together with its massive, powerful mandibles. Once the ant locked its jaws shut, the healer would twist its body off, leaving the head behind as a natural, biological clamp that wouldn't let go even in death. It is arguably the most metal way to treat an injury in history. You are literally closing a wound with the severed heads of insects, which is both incredibly resourceful and the stuff of nightmares. 13. Modern marathon runners train for months to run 26 miles, but for tribes like the Tarahumara or the messengers of the Inca and Apache, that distance was basically a warm-up. These people developed the ability to run for hundreds of miles over rough terrain without stopping, fueled often by nothing more than corn beer or chia seeds. This wasn't just for sport. It was persistence hunting, where they would literally chase a deer until the animal collapsed from exhaustion because it couldn't sweat to cool down like a human. They turned running into a weapon. Imagine being a deer, sprinting for your life, and every time you look back, that same human is just jogging behind you, relentless and inevitable, like a horror movie villain, until you just give up and die. 14. Long before Ray-Ban was selling sunglasses for hundreds of dollars, the Inuit invented the original and frankly much cooler snow goggles. Living in a world of blinding white snow and ice, they faced the constant threat of snow blindness, so they carved eyewear out of caribou antler, bone, or ivory with tiny horizontal slits. These slits reduce the amount of ultraviolet light hitting the eye while sharpening focus, similar to how a pinhole camera works. They didn't just protect your vision. They made you look like a cyberpunk character from a futuristic sci-fi movie. It is a perfect example of indigenous engineering solving a complex medical problem with a piece of bone and some physics, proving they were way ahead of the fashion curve. 15. When we think of Native American warriors, we usually picture leather shirts and war paint, but the Tlingit warriors of the northwest coast looked like walking tanks. They built elaborate body armor using hard wooden slats woven together with twine, worn over thick hide tunics. To top it off, they wore massive wooden helmets carved with the terrifying faces of animals or spirits intended to scare the soul out of their enemies. This gear was so tough it could deflect arrows, clubs, and there are even accounts of it stopping Russian musket balls during early skirmishes. Seeing a wall of these wooden juggernauts charging at you with totemic faces would have been like fighting a forest that suddenly decided to kill you. 16. Catching an eagle is not like catching a pigeon. It is a bird with talons that can crush a human hand. Yet for many Plains tribes, shooting one was out of the question because the feathers had to be harvested ceremonially. So, brave hunters would dig a deep pit, cover it with brush, and place a piece of raw meat on top as bait. The hunter would then hide inside the hole, sometimes for days without moving, waiting for the bird to land. When the eagle grabbed the meat, the hunter had to reach up through the sticks and grab the bird's legs with his bare hands. It was a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, where if you missed, you got your face shredded by an angry raptor. It required a level of patience and reflexes that makes fishing look like an adrenaline sport. 17. You probably know lacrosse as a prep school sport, but for tribes like the Cherokee and Choctaw, it was known as the little brother of war, and it was basically a massive, organized brawl. We aren't talking about 12 guys on a field. These games could involve hundreds or even thousands of players on a pitch that stretched for miles without clear boundaries. The rules were virtually non-existent, and the heavy wooden sticks were used to crack skulls just as often as they were used to catch the ball. It was often used to settle tribal disputes to avoid actual war, but honestly, the difference was negligible. Broken limbs and even deaths on the field were considered part of the game. If you think modern sports fans are intense, just imagine a game where the referee allows you to bludgeon the goalie to score a point. 18. Pre-workout supplements have nothing on the absolute gut punch that was the black drink. Before important councils or going into battle, warriors in the southeast would gather to chug a highly caffeinated tea made from the roasted leaves of the Yupon holly. But this wasn't a casual tea party. The specific goal of the ritual was to drink so much of the liquid that you immediately vomited everywhere. The belief was that you were purging yourself of all spiritual impurities and weakness, literally puking out the bad vibes so you could be pure for war. It was a communal heave fest. It gives a whole new perspective on cleansing diets. Because for them, unless you were retching on the ground with your brothers, you weren't spiritually ready to lead. 19. If you think a sauna is just a nice way to relax after a workout, the Native American sweat lodge would probably give you a panic attack. These weren't just hot rooms. They were intense spiritual gauntlets designed to push the human body to its absolute limit. Warriors would sit in total pitch-black darkness while water was poured over superheated rocks, raising the temperature to unbearable levels. The combination of sensory deprivation, extreme dehydration, and blistering heat often induced powerful hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. They were basically cooking themselves to talk to the spirits. It wasn't about opening your pores. It was about breaking down your ego through physical suffering until you saw things that weren't there, proving that spirituality sometimes requires heat stroke. 20. In the icy forests of the north, the Algonquian peoples lived in genuine terror of a condition known as Wendigo psychosis. The belief was that if you tasted human flesh, or even just had too much greed during a famine, you would transform into a Wendigo, a giant, insatiable monster with a heart of ice. This fear was so real that it became a recognizable mental illness. People who started showing signs of lethargy or weird eating habits were sometimes executed by their own families preemptively, just in case they were turning into a cannibalistic demon. It is a grim reminder that in a world of starvation and freezing cold, the scariest monster wasn't a wolf or a bear, but the hunger inside your own neighbor that could turn them into a nightmare. 21. Most folklore figures are fun to talk about, but for the Navajo, the skinwalker is a subject so terrifying that even mentioning it today is considered dangerous. These are corrupt witches who have gained the power to shapeshift into animals like wolves, coyotes, or bears, usually by killing a close family member to seal their dark pact. They aren't cool magical creatures. They are pure evil, said to run alongside cars at high speeds and lure people to their deaths. The taboo is so strong that many traditional Navajo will simply get up and leave the room if you bring the topic up. It is the ultimate he who must not be named. But instead of a wizard war, you get a coyote standing on its hind legs staring into your window at night. 22. The Iroquois had a medical association that looked more like a horror movie cast called the False Face Society. These healers wore grotesque, distorted wooden masks carved from living trees, intended to scare away the evil spirits causing disease. But the weirdest part is that the masks themselves were considered alive. If you owned one, you had to treat it like a pet. You had to anoint it with oil and literally feed it tobacco and corn mush regularly. If you neglected your mask, it would get hungry and angry, potentially causing the very sickness it was supposed to cure. Imagine having a first aid kit that you have to breastfeed every week or it attacks you. That is the level of commitment we are talking about for healthcare. 23. Grief makes people do crazy things, but the Iroquois took it to a strategic level with something historians call mourning wars. When a beloved family member died, the women of the tribe would demand that the warriors go out and capture someone from a rival tribe to replace them. This wasn't just slavery. It was a forced identity swap. The captive would be given the name of the dead person and adopted into the family to literally fill the empty spot at the dinner table. If they accepted their new role, they became a full member of the tribe. If they resisted, they were tortured to death. It is a bizarre mix of wholesome adoption and terrifying kidnapping, essentially saying, "You are my grandpa now, whether you like it or not." 24. In modern society, you are stuck with the name on your birth certificate forever unless you pay a court fee. But in many Native American cultures, your name was just a temporary status update. A person might change their name half a dozen times throughout their life based on their experiences or achievements. If you did something brave, you got a cool name like Iron Shirt. But if you did something stupid, you might be stuck with a humiliating name until you redeemed yourself. It was a social credit system built into your identity. Imagine having to introduce yourself as tripped over a log at parties until you finally did something cool enough to upgrade to bear hunter. It definitely kept people motivated to not screw up in public. 25. While modern society is still arguing about bathrooms and gender roles, many Native American tribes had this figured out centuries ago with the concept of two-spirit people. They didn't see gender as a binary checklist of blue or pink. They recognized individuals who embodied both the male and female spirit within a single body. Far from being outcasts, these people were often revered as holy and gifted, taking on special roles as matchmakers, healers, or naming ceremonial leaders because they could see the world from both perspectives. It completely flips the script on the historical narrative of traditional gender roles. While Europeans were panicking about who wore trousers, Native Americans were basically saying, "Oh, you have two spirits? That's cool. You are probably better at multitasking than the rest of us. Here is a sacred job." 26. If you find porcelain dolls creepy, you might want to stay away from the traditional corn husk dolls made by the Iroquois, because they are completely faceless. This isn't because the makers were lazy or bad at drawing. It is a deliberate design choice based on a legend about the corn spirit. The story goes that she became so vain and obsessed with her own beauty that the creator punished her by taking her face away completely. To teach children, and especially little girls, that vanity is a sin, and that appearance doesn't matter, the dolls are left blank. It is a wholesome moral lesson wrapped in a toy that looks like absolute nightmare fuel to the modern eye, proving that ancient parenting was a mix of love and mild psychological terror. 27. When you break a plate today, you throw it in the trash. But for the Mimbri people of the Southwest, breaking pottery was a crucial part of a funeral. They created stunningly intricate bowls painted with geometric designs and animals, but before placing them in a grave, they would punch a jagged hole right through the center. This wasn't vandalism, it was a kill hole. They believed the pot had a spirit that was trapped inside the clay form, and by physically killing the object, they released its soul to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. It is a beautiful, poetic concept, even if it drives modern archaeologists crazy to find thousands of pieces of priceless ancient art with deliberate holes smashed right through the best part. 28. We live in a world where wealth is measured by how much you hoard, but the potlatch ceremony of the Pacific Northwest tribes was basically economic suicide as a flex. Chiefs would invite rival tribes to massive feasts where the goal wasn't to save money, but to give away or destroy as much of their own property as possible. We are talking about burning piles of expensive blankets, smashing copper shields, and giving away canoes just to prove they could afford to lose them. The chief who died with the most toys was a loser. The one who burned the most was a legend. It is the ultimate anti-capitalist power move. Bankrupting yourself just to show your neighbors that you are so rich, you literally do not care. 29. Long before power bars or survivalist MREs, the Cree and other northern tribes invented the ultimate superfood called pemmican. And honestly, it sounds like a heart attack in a bag. They would take dried game meat, pound it into a fine powder, and mix it with melted fat and berries until it formed a dense, greasy brick. It wasn't gourmet dining, but it was virtually indestructible. A piece of pemmican could last for years or even decades without spoiling. It was so calorie-dense that it fueled the entire fur trade, allowing voyeurs to travel thousands of miles without cooking. It is basically a meat-flavored energy bar that never rots, which is a prepper's dream and a cardiologist's nightmare. 30. Today we panic if we forget our stainless steel hydro flasks, but on the Great Plains, the original water bottle was a little more organic. Tribes would take the bladder of a buffalo, clean it out, hopefully very thoroughly, and use it as a canteen to carry water across the prairie. It makes perfect sense from a use every part of the animal perspective. But you have to admire the stomach it takes to drink tepid water out of a bison's internal organ on a hot day. It is the definition of sustainable living, completely biodegradable and plastic-free, though I am pretty sure you won't see buffalo bladder becoming the next big trend on Kickstarter anytime soon. 31. Parents today spend a fortune on high-tech diapers, but Indigenous mothers had a solution that was free, disposable, and grew on trees. Well, on the ground. They used moss bags, carriers packed with dried sphagnum moss, to hold their babies. It sounds scratchy, but this specific moss is actually a superplant. It is incredibly absorbent, soaking up moisture better than cotton, and it has natural antiseptic properties that prevent diaper rash. The baby would be wrapped snugly in this moss-filled cocoon, staying dry and clean without a single chemical. It is arguably superior to modern diapers, proving that sometimes the best technology is just a pile of dried plants you found in the forest. 32. If you think talking to your houseplants makes you look crazy, traditional Native American healers would say you are just being polite. Before harvesting any plant for medicine, a healer was required to speak to it, offering a prayer and tobacco, and explicitly asking for permission to pick it. They had to explain to the plant exactly how it would be used to help someone. The belief was that if you just grabbed the plant without asking, its spirit would be offended, and the medicine simply wouldn't work. It turns botany into a negotiation. Imagine having to convince a bush of berries that you are a good person before you can eat breakfast. It definitely stops you from taking nature for granted. 33. We live in a world where the loudest person usually wins the argument, but many tribes perfected the art of civilized debate with the talking stick. The rule was simple yet revolutionary. If you held the sacred stick, you had the floor, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was allowed to interrupt you until you passed it on. It was the ultimate moderator tool for high-stakes council meetings, ensuring that even the quietest elder got heard without some hothead shouting over them. It taught patience and active listening, skills that have completely vanished from modern politics and family Thanksgiving dinners. Honestly, we should bring this back immediately. Imagine how much more productive Congress or your group chat would be if you physically couldn't speak until someone handed you a piece of wood. We just sprinted through 33 examples of pure indigenous ingenuity and madness. But let's be real. History is a bottomless pit of weirdness. I know some of you are sitting on facts that are even darker or stranger than the stinkheads. What specific twisted custom did I completely miss in this list? Drop the most obscure fact you know in the comments and school me. If you want more unfiltered history, hit subscribe.